Hey friends, today we're going to talk about payments on the internet, how it all works generally, and things you should consider as a web designer. So to help me explain all this, because I'm not an expert in all this, I've invited John Apostolo onto the channel. Now, John is a Squarespace designer. He builds Squarespace websites, but he's also built an app that helps people accept payments online. And as he was talking to me about it and we were having a conversation, it was clear to me he had super deep knowledge about how all of this works. And I found our conversation interesting, so I told him, hey, let's hang on for a second. Let's record all of this, and then I can just put it on my YouTube channel and help share all this knowledge with all of you. So this interview is broken up into kind of two parts. Generally, we're talking about how do payments work on the internet? What are all the different pieces? Stripe, Squarespace payments, PayPal, how does it all work? And then next, we talk about some things you should consider as a web designer when accepting larger payments on the internet. What are all the places that this could go wrong and go right for you? So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Let's dive in. John, you created a product called Fortitude, and we'll talk about that a little later in the video. But as we were initially talking about payments and stuff online, you clearly had really deep knowledge into how all of this infrastructure stuff works. You were doing stuff like negotiating Stripe rates, that 2.9% for some of your clients. I didn't even realize that was possible. Like, how did you get into this world and doing all of this stuff?
Yeah, well, so I've been a web designer for a while, and then I had a experience with chargebacks. I had two experiences at the same time. So chargeback is when the customer,
Yeah,
calls the bank.
and
One
says,
was,
no,
yeah, they
I want
say the charge isn't valid. I don't like my stuff. They can say whatever they want, and then they get a credit
oof,
on their statement immediately, and the bank investigates. And two things happened at the same time. First, one of my friends accepted a credit card for a for a website, and they got a charge back, and it was like this. It was like ridiculous. They lost like $5,000, something crazy.
geez.
And then also, I was living overseas at the time, and I was ripped off at a store, and I also filed a chargeback. And so I saw
Huh.
both sides of the process at the same time. And then I was ripped off. I maintained my innocence. I lost my chargeback,
Sure.
and my friend also lost. So I saw how both sides. The store ripped me off was a big corporation, so they
Yeah.
won their chargeback dispute, and then the little guy, my friend, also lost on both sides. It was like this
So the
doesn't
little
make any
guy's
sense.
just losing like on both ends here. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was really angry. This was at a Ray-Ban store, so we're talking about like
Oh
$300,
no.
and I was angry. Yeah, I bought
No.
the Meta, the camera
Yeah.
glasses, and I got
Yeah.
them. I was like, this is not like a thing.
It
This is not.
wasn't them. It wasn't them.
It was this was like I want to return them, and it was like,
Oh.
and I walked in the store and I was like, here's your return policy. Here's your this. I was in Italy, and they're just like, no.
Oh.
Uh, yeah. So, anyways, I like dug really deep into this process. I have a couple friends who work at Stripe. Talked to them. I talked to a couple lawyers. Basically anybody who would talk to me about payments. Talked to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau here in the States. Uh,
Jeez.
and basically, it was, yeah, it
Pretty
was just
exhaustive detail. Like getting in.
exhaust.
This is like,
I was after my $300, Will. I was
yeah, that would make me
um,
angry. Right.
yeah. And so basically through all that research, started having clients, and my business has changed a little bit from just web design where I work with larger companies and startups. So I started
Hmm.
advising them on their payments. And basically there's this buffet of options that you have to protect yourself from chargebacks, from fraud, to pay less in rates if you're processing a lot of money,
Yeah.
$1 million plus. But if you're not, which I'm still not,
Most
or if
most
you're,
web designers are going to be under that $1 million a year for
or
sure.
most of our
I'm well
clients,
under,
right?
or most
Yeah,
people, right? Most small
right,
businesses, correct?
exactly. Um, those options really are much less available and definitely not advertised.
Right.
So for the web designer side, I started a payments platform to protect web designers from chargebacks and fraud and help us save money on processing fees. And then on the sort of client side, I've been working on content and people who join our platform. We help them with their clients and help them understand the whole process.
Sure. Okay. So as you're on your client side stuff, as you're
Yeah.
getting started and helping your clients understand just the entire payment infrastructure of the internet.
Yeah.
Where do you start with that? That's such a large conversation. There's Stripe, there's PayPal, there's Affinity, there's all these like payment things, there's Visas, MasterCards. How do you walk a client, one of your clients, through what are the things they absolutely need? What are the things you look at in their business to help them decide? Like, and also, how does this whole process work? There's a lot
Yeah.
in that question, but just start where you feel comfortable.
Sure. So it depends where they are. If it's an older client or a client who started a business before, I would say been running a business for more than 10 years and
Hmm.
they've been accepting credit cards, they're going to have an understanding of the way things used to operate and things have changed. So
Okay.
the first thing you need to do is ask clients, first of all, do you want to accept credit cards? And they'll likely say yes. And then you
Yeah.
say, so what do you know about? Like, what are your expectations? If they start talking to you about things called interchange rates and, oh, I don't want to accept Amex because it's more expensive and that kind of stuff, then your first step is to say, things have changed. It used to be that there would be, you would have your local rep who would be, you could get these jobs in high school. You could go knock on small businesses' doors and set them up with a merchant account or be run through a local bank. And
Hmm.
they charge what's called interchange plus pricing, which is all the
Yeah.
different card brands. The, premium cards have higher, it's called interchange rates, right? So that pays for the
So this is
reward.
this is like the Amex charging like 3.5% versus Visa or
Exactly. Yeah.
someone 2.9 or something. Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
like Amex, you probably heard small businesses or even like Costco doesn't accept Amex, right? Because Amex's
Right.
interchange rate is really high. But
Hmm.
Amex cardholders' average income also tends to be higher, which is how they justify it.
Sure.
Whereas debit card rates in the States, there are no rewards, and debit card rates are
Hmm.
actually capped by the federal government. They're very low. And so, there's this whole sort of spread, Visa premium cards, Visa premium select, Visa,
Sure.
it used to be very,
And
very complicated.
this is all still old world, right? Old world of how this
This
all worked.
So this is generally old world. Two companies came
Okay.
along, Square and Stripe, and said, and some could argue PayPal, but less so, and said, this is too complicated. These hidden fees, merchant accounts, it doesn't make sense. We're going to simplify everything. We're going to give you what's called a blended rate, one percentage rate that you'll pay for every transaction, and we'll figure out the details and negotiate with the
Hmm.
card networks. So they came up with a number 2.9%, right? And that number has held for 2.9% plus 30 cents is basically industry standard to accept a credit card online, what's called, when the customer isn't present for the transaction. It should be a little bit lower, like 2.6, 2.5 if it's a tap or a chip.
Hmm.
But if the customer isn't present, 2.9. And the card company, Square or Stripe, makes money on the average interchange rate. So if you swipe an Amex, they might lose some money. But if you swipe a debit card, they're going to make like 2.6%, something
Ooh,
crazy.
something pretty good.
Their average, if you look at the public filings, is between 1 and 1.3, 1.4% profit. So of that
So
2.9, that's what they get.
interesting. And you're actually, if I'm understanding correctly, you're telling me something I didn't even know. So this 3.5%, whatever it is that we've heard Amex charges, if you're
Yeah.
accepting payments online via Stripe, you're not paying that 3.5. You're just paying this blended rate of
Yeah,
2.9%. And then they do
exactly.
whatever negotiated with everyone else behind the
Exactly.
scenes. So that's just
And
like
then
for Stripe, that's that flat fee.
exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. And there are some payment processors that will upcharge you for Amex cards. Wave, the invoicing platform,
Yeah.
is one that
Yeah,
does that.
that's who we use actually
Yeah,
for
yeah,
some of our
that's
stuff.
who you formerly use, right?
Yeah, formally. There we go. Yeah,
um,
exactly.
but you can get this interchange plus pricing, but you usually, for most small businesses, you don't really want it. On the
Hmm.
flip side, after you start processing about $1 million is when you can really, $1 million a year is when you can be really taken seriously by a card processor. Then you're going to start to negotiate, and sometimes it makes sense to switch to Interchange Plus, and so like my firm, we do these kinds of, we can look at your cards and say, oh, 30% of your customers pay with a debit card. We should be doing Interchange Plus, right? Because you're going to
Yeah,
save a lot more if you're doing more premium card. It's a big math problem
sure.
for a small business. You don't worry about it. You pay 2.9%. In a lot of states, and it's against card network rules to charge, to say, oh, we're going to charge you an extra 3% or an extra dollar to pay with a credit card. It's the cost of doing business. There are studies, some sponsored by card companies, also independent ones, that show that people spend a lot more than 3% more when they have the
Sure.
ability to pay with credit card. So it's
Yeah.
an annoying tax that we pay in the States. In Europe, it's 1 to 2% because they don't have these rewards programs. They don't have miles and loyalty and all that
Right.
stuff.
That's where a lot of all that goes to. Yes,
Exactly.
these
So
crazy little
Stripe,
reward stuff.
yeah. So Stripe
Yeah.
makes the same amount of money. Well, actually, it's a little bit different in Europe, but basically these processing companies are going to make their 1%, and then the rest is going to be paying for the fees. So,
Okay.
get a nice credit card that gets you the miles because you're paying for it anyways.
Might as
But
well.
that's, when people complain about the 3% fee, you can
So,
either not accept payments or call your congressman.
or
That's about
not. Well,
it.
call your congressman. Yeah, and even then, I'm not sure how far you're going to get.
I don't
I
think you
want to.
will, but
I
give
want
it a
to come
shot.
back to that because you have some interesting thoughts on that price and why it's actually quite reasonable, and I want to come back to that. But to wrap up what we were just talking about, so if you're a web designer, you are advising your clients. If
Yeah,
they're under $1 million, this 2.9% plus 30 cents, that's kind of industry standard. That's what you should go with. And then if you hit over $1 million, you have options. $1 million annual, I'm assuming. You
yeah.
have options to
So I would
do
say
interchange
$1 million.
rates. Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah.
Sorry.
You have options. You have interchange rates. You can also just negotiate the blended rate down a couple percentage point, or not
Okay.
percentage, a couple basis points. Um, There also, if you're a nonprofit, you should be paying less than 2.9%. You should be
Mm.
set up with a nonprofit account. That's an important thing to note.
And even
Uh,
under $1 million for nonprofits.
if you're a nonprofit processing $50, yeah, it should be, if you think about, Stripe's their margin is 1%, right? Let's just use
Mm.
that as our sort of base point. They're not gonna charge a nonprofit the full 1%.
Sure.
But yeah, payment processors kind of fight over nonprofits sometimes. Who
Mm.
gets to underwrite them. So it can get pretty competitive. So if you're a nonprofit, it makes sense to just at the least just reach out to your processor and say, hey, what are your nonprofit rates? I would get a couple quotes and compare.
Okay. Well, good to
Yeah,
know. Good to know.
yeah,
Okay, so 2.9% plus 30 cents each transaction. You've
yep,
said that's kind of a reasonable rate. And I know that feels like a lot for every single
yeah,
transaction as everything is kind of online. Um,
yeah.
but you have some really interesting thoughts about why that's reasonable. What goes into that? And what's a good way to think about that as we're web designers losing that 3%?
Yeah. So if you're a web designer, if you're selling products online, either digital products or physical products, especially if they're low dollar value, I know like that 30 cents can bite, right? If you're
Yeah,
selling $5 things, that 30 like
thirty
that's
cents. It eats up
substantial.
that 6% right there, right?
It's Yeah, I mean, your alternative is to accept cryptocurrency or to like ask people to mail you checks or like it's you are
Yeah,
trapped in the system. I will say that the 3%, I like to call it a tax because that's really what it
yeah,
is.
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
it it's annoying, but like you can do a lot of complaining, or you can spend the time and energy you would complain to get 3% more customers, which isn't is
Sure.
is probably an easier sell than trying to fight Visa. So like that's the way I think about it,
Yep.
right? As somebody who's powerless, it gets people to spend faster. A
Yeah.
lot of people need that, even businesses need that cash flow flexibility,
Mm-hmm.
right? With my business, I have two business credit cards open, and I have their statement dates spent, put in the future. So I always have 45 days to pay, at least 45 days to pay a credit card, right? My
Mm.
business, if I'm paying a contractor and then I'm extending credit to a client on, invoicing them at the end of the month, right? I rely on that sort of cash flow. A lot of especially small businesses rely on that. And
Yeah.
so generally, if you were to just raise your prices 3%, you probably wouldn't,
Could make that
probably
up.
nothing would
Right.
happen. But if you were to say we don't accept credit cards, or please don't make it hard for someone to pay you, right? Like
Right.
that's the
Yeah,
most
you don't want
important
to do
part of your
that. Right.
business. Make it easy for people to pay you. The other thing in the States, with tax rules, especially if you're an independent contractor or single member LLC, if someone pays you with a check, you got to send them tax forms that probably have your social security number on them. And there's a lot of
You have
back
to
and
do all.
forth,
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of
right?
overhead.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
if you just, so with my firm, we only accept payments on Fortitude, either credit card or ACH debit, if you're paying us under $10,000. And we won't,
Yeah.
like, you can't ask for our tax forms. No, pay us online.
Right.
And the reason for that is I'm a single member LLC. I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
give all my clients my social security number.
Right.
And the problem is that a lot of times you'll see, especially with smaller businesses or newer businesses, they'll pay you the check, no problem, or a Zelle or wire transfer, anything like that, no problem. Then at the end of the year or the following tax, the February,
Mm-hmm.
their accountant takes a look and they say, "Wait, who did you paid Will Miles,
Yeah.
Will Myers three
Will
thousand dollars
Myers.
for a website? We need
Right.
his tax form." And they'll reach out to
Yeah.
you, and you are required by
Yeah.
law to give it to them
Yeah.
for all payments. I believe it's over
In the
$600.
US.
It's
Yeah.
really
Anything
low
over
in the
600.
US.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
like that's like what when you do with a payment processor, then you have that tax relationship with the payment processor, and you get one tax form from the payment processor. And then you also have just one form that says how much you made, and you make sure you report that to the government. And so
Right.
you don't run the risk of double reporting and all that stuff.
And I think what feels bad about this is like it feels like every new SaaS like wants to take a percentage of your revenue. And so it's
Yeah.
like the payments is 3%, but then someone else wants to take 5% for your courses, and then someone wants to take like 2% for your emails, and it just feels like you're just getting your whole business eaten away by all these software companies.
Yeah.
But to your point, I think the base level of everything you need is like you need to be able to do transactions online, and so that
Yeah.
3% is probably pretty standard.
Yeah.
Um,
And then the
okay,
other thing, I know we're going to get into this later, but if you're accepting payments consistently over $500 or like substantial payments, this is probably more for the web designer side of the business instead of advising the
hmm
clients. You should be offering the ability to pay with ACH direct debit. You can get lower fees, and your fees can be capped, right? So Fortitude
right,
with ACH direct debit, you never pay more than $5, right? It could be $1 million transaction. It's 0.8% capped at $5. And so
right,
that is an option to sort of keep in your pocket. And then we offer, we can help you incentivize your client to use ACH instead of
to do
credit
other
card
stuff.
to save
Right,
everybody. Yeah.
save everyone a little bit of money.
Yeah.
Okay, so sticking with just a web designer advising their clients,
Yeah.
there's a few different options in the Squarespace backend. There is
Yep.
PayPal, there's Stripe, there's Squarespace Payments, there's
Yes.
Square.
Yep.
How do you think about all of these options? What to turn on, what not to turn on? Like, what are
Yeah.
the pros cons considerations of them?
So the first thing is, and I think this is important to note, that some clients are very hard-headed. And a lot of times
Yes.
clients who are very hard-headed are probably just getting started in their business or processing very low amounts. Squarespace is a fantastic platform in that, I like to call it the Apple of web design, in that it's a
hmm
high quality platform. You might not get all the you might not get every checkbox that you want, but the checkboxes that you have, you can just click them, they look great. There isn't a bad option when you're just starting out.
Right.
You want to get positive cash flow, you want to, whatever is easiest. Older clients will prefer PayPal. A lot of it's kind of, this is before
Yeah.
my time, right? But I know older people who like will only pay with PayPal. They think it's sketchy to put their credit card into a website, right?
hmm
People confuse authentication and identification, right? Where a credit card number is like basically just a way to identify you. It's something you just keep
Yeah.
reasonably secure, but it isn't the way it works with the fraud protection stuff is that the idea is this is a way to identify your account with the bank, not necessarily like a
Oh,
secret
interesting.
code. This is the way I
Yeah.
think about it, right? It's just like
Yeah.
your social security number is something that's, you know, should be private, right? It identifies you, but it's not
But like you
necessarily
just
like
said, it goes out on all these tax forms. Like it can
exactly.
get leaked pretty simply. Interesting.
Exactly. So if your client is like insistent on processing with PayPal because of their sort of preconceived notions, and you can't break that notion, which I would encourage you to do with what we're talking about, just let them have it.
Hmm.
Square, I believe Squarespace only does Square for in-person transactions,
I
and it
think
like
so.
syncs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Square, if they want to be selling at a farmer's market or in person, you set them up with a Square account and you get the $50 tap reader
Hmm.
and they're off to the races. Or actually now, if they have an iPhone, they can just tap the phone, which is
Oh
really
yeah.
nice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty nice. I've done
That's
that a
pretty
couple
cool.
times. Yeah.
Um, Between Squarespace payments and Stripe, the first thing that I'll say, so Squarespace has been using sort of Stripe proper with the Stripe dashboard as an integration for a very long time.
Yeah.
Stripe does this 2.9% thing. They charge you that fee, and then you have optional other Stripe services, Stripe's integrations, that whole buffet of options, and there are a lot of options there. And then if you look at Squarespace's financial statements, you will see that the commerce revenue is not well defined, but there are some big
Yeah.
numbers there. And one of those big numbers is a kickback that Squarespace receives from Stripe when you use the
Hmm.
Stripe integration. Stripe, we're saying
That makes sense.
we're
Yeah.
just saying across the board they're making about 1%. Squarespace is saying, "Hey, I'm bringing you a lot of customers, right? There are a lot of people using Stripe on
I want to
Squarespace.
kick back.
I want to kick back."
Yeah.
Squarespace has recently, and this is all related to their, going private and sort of the transition in the company, is they have released their own Squarespace payments product. But if you
Yeah.
look very, very closely, it turns out the underlying payment is still processed by Stripe. So
Hmm.
Squarespace Payments is what is called a Stripe Connect integration. And
Hmm.
so what that means is, I'm very familiar with this because this is what Fortitude uses too.
Yeah.
Um, Squarespace accepts some more responsibility in terms of customer service, and they sort of white label the whole experience. So instead of having a Stripe dashboard, you just look at everything in Squarespace. But the underlying infrastructure, and importantly, and we don't know exactly, but we can assume the risk analysis infrastructure has been
Hmm.
built by Stripe, and Squarespace is paying for it. Now you might say, wait, this is kind of ridiculous. Why do I have like they're both the same thing,
They're both similar. Right.
right? Squarespace, does this negotiation with Stripe for their kickback. They probably found that as they want to grow, they'll get a better deal if they switch to Interchange Plus pricing and get it directly from Stripe and sort of do more work for themselves, and they'll make more money. The difference between the two is, both of them have generally the same pricing, except Squarespace Payments is new.
Yeah.
And because it's new, there are a couple what I advise clients are downsides. Stripe has custom fraud rules that you can set. You can block certain
Hmm.
countries, block certain transactions, all this sort of stuff that you can't customize yet on Squarespace. So
Right.
that's a big concern for everyone, but especially if you're charging like very low dollar value items, I would say sub $5, you need to be
Hmm.
worried about what's called a card testing scheme. So somebody goes on to the dark web and they buy 1,000 stolen credit cards. Now you can buy
Yeah.
two types of stolen credit. Well, you can buy a lot of different types, but the two main types are verified and not verified. Not verified is, they hacked somebody's email. I don't know. They got these cards. They don't know if they work. They're worth
Right.
not very much. If they're
Right.
verified that they work, they're worth a lot more,
A good bit
right?
more.
Like they can get past these fraud rules, well, then we can do the scam. And then these criminals, they probably won't actually charge the card themselves. They'll then just sell it for more. They'll take a not verified card, verify it, sell it for more, then somebody else will then go do credit card fraud. So
But
they're
wouldn't this be something that Stripe or Squarespace would handle these levels of like fraud things? Isn't that stuff that both of them would, I mean, have incentive to handle?
So both of them have
I guess.
incentive to handle. The particular attack that I'm talking about is somebody goes on your website and they check out 1,000 times buying a $1 item to see if the cards work. If it gets declined, they throw it out. If the charge goes through, they sell it instantly for a lot more money.
Yeah.
Those kinds of attacks are dangerous for a couple reasons. First of all, if you see them, you then have to refund all the transactions really quickly. That's the name of the game, right? You
Sure.
call someone like me and say, "What do I do?" And the first thing is refund everything now.
Yeah.
The problem with that is, Stripe and Squarespace are looking at you from a financial perspective, right? It's automated. They want to know what's the risk because they're accepting risk when they process payments. Um,
Right.
if you're refunding a lot of things very quickly, that triggers automated risk processing, right?
Hmm.
Because that shows that your business isn't able to fulfill what they say they're going to fulfill, which throws doubt into your ability to run a business, which will
Sure.
concern your payment processor. On the
Sure.
other hand, if your customers notice a $5 transaction, a $1 transaction, and they decide to file a chargeback,
Yeah.
you are first of all going to get hit with a chargeback fee right away, whether you win, lose, or draw, which are
Yeah.
usually
Yeah.
15, $20, right? So imagine a
Yeah. It's a
thousand
good bit.
transactions,
Oof.
$20, $15, you're out 15 grand that you'll never get back.
Yeah.
Then after that, if your chargeback rate goes above industry standard, which is, between 0.5% and 1%, depending on your industry, then you're a credit risk to your payment processor and they'll shut down your account
Right.
and they'll keep your money
Yeah.
for
Have
120
you have
days.
you seen this happen on Squarespace to like a Squarespace client?
So I have not seen this happen on a Squarespace payments client because I have not advised any clients to use Squarespace payments. I have used this on Stripe integrations with
Yeah.
Squarespace with anybody happens pretty frequently.
Yeah.
The card
Oh,
cashing stuff,
interesting. But I
yeah,
mean, like through someone using Squarespace, even if they've connected Stripe, have you seen it happening to
yeah,
them using Stripe?
yeah.
Wow. Okay, so we got PayPal. You want to advise you would advise people against setting up PayPal. Is that mutually exclusive from setting up something like Stripe or Squarespace payments? So
Oh,
it's fine to just like set it up on
yeah.
Squarespace, right? So
Yeah, and my problem with PayPal is usually on the dispute side,
yeah,
um, and on just sort of I hate to say it, but like the vibe.
yeah,
Like to me,
yeah. I know what you mean.
to me, it's a poor user
I
experience.
know
You
what
get
you mean.
directed to another page, whatever. In
It's
terms of
definitely a bit more
negotiations,
difficult.
if you ever get there, they're much harder to negotiate with, because they have this proprietary thing. They've connected you right to the buyer, and they
Right.
own the whole relationship, and so they're not really going to negotiate with you.
Yeah.
Um, whereas the card stuff you can, but for a smaller business, again, chargebacks, processing rates. These are all things you should be aware of.
Yeah.
And you might want to mention to a client to show that you know your stuff. But at the
But
end of the
it's
day,
it's
yeah,
fine to just set it up.
yeah,
Okay. And then you have Square for like in-person merchants, and that's,
yep,
probably people are aware of that. And then you
yeah,
have this decision between Stripe and Squarespace payments.
yeah,
And you right now, you're advising most of your clients just to go with Stripe because it's more, I guess, robust and evolved from Squarespace payments. Like,
yeah.
what would be the things Squarespace? I will say Squarespace payments. I haven't used it,
Hmm.
so I don't fully know either. But it's clear Squarespace is going in this direction that they want to make it kind of like one click, as easy as possible for people to get set up, and I can see it being beneficial there.
Yeah,
As it's you don't have to jump into Stripe and set up a Stripe account and figure all that stuff out. I think that
yeah.
kind of
So I kind of want
scares
to
people.
bash that sort of the one click thing. I would argue that it's
Please,
basically the
please.
same. The reason
Okay, that's
the
good.
reason it's basically the same, first of all, is that the Squarespace payments onboarding is a Stripe embedded component.
So
So
it's close to the same. Right.
it's the colors are different.
Right.
Right? Everything else, it's just the Stripe page. It's
Mm-hmm.
embedded in Squarespace and it's custom branded. So
Got
the
it.
onboarding process is literally exactly the same. The only difference is that, or two differences. One is that you create a Stripe login,
Mm-hmm.
which I would argue is a good practice because Stripe will let you do, in terms of securing your account, Stripe has passkeys. Stripe has two-factor. It's a financial account, right? This is very important.
Sure.
That's I would argue it's a good thing to have two separate
Right.
credentials. The other thing is Squarespace Payments doesn't have you set up a payout account until after you get paid. So
Hmm.
that they've done to onboard people faster, probably. That's
Yeah.
something that concerns me. When you look at, if you sort of zoom out, right, when it used to be the kid knocking on your door saying, "Do you want to process credit cards with my bank?" To do
Right.
that, you used to have to pay an application fee, and they would underwrite you. And they would want to
Hmm.
see your financial statements. They would want to see your personal credit. They would want to see a bunch of information about your business. It would take a couple weeks before you could get up and running.
Yeah.
Many people include, this is one of the Collison brothers who started Stripe. One of the things they were famous for is what's called the Collison install, where it started with just developers. They would say, "Oh, we process payments." And
Hmm.
people would be like, "Oh, that's cool. I have a company." And one of the brothers would be like, "Okay, cool. Give me your laptop. I'll install it." And they would go into the code, and Stripe is famous for being very easy to integrate and be done. You're set up.
Hmm.
But hold on, there's the Patriot Act where you have to check if people are terrorists. There's all these rules, right?
Yeah.
So what happens is
Right.
Stripe onboards you and lets you accept payments, but they don't let you get paid out for like 5 to 7 days on your first payment. In those 5 to 7 days, they do the same automated checks. They might run a credit report on you personally. That's why they want your social. Actually, Stripe sometimes does it, but other what's called PayFacs, which is like the way this business operates, will run credit checks. They'll check your business credit. They'll look at your website. They'll do all this stuff on the back end
Yeah.
while you're accepting payments and you think you're all set. The problem is if you trip their fraud wires in any way, if you're part of their restricted businesses, anything like that, then they're going to say, "Hey, you're in violation of our terms of service. We can't support you." And you're going to be like, "Okay, whatever. I'll go home." And they're going to say, "But we might get a chargeback from your account because you're higher risk. So we need to hold the money you just put in for at least 4 months, 120 days." And you say, "What? I just launched my store. I got all my friends and family. You're holding it for 120 days." Yeah, and we might refund your clients. We're not sure. You'll see.
Yeah. Just up to them.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so this happens in both, this happens, and remember, Stripe and Squarespace Payments have the same underlying risk engine, we think.
Hmm.
Um, so, but with Squarespace saying set up your account after the first payment, it gives me a little bit more pause than the Stripe thing. And what I say with, if you're ever signing up for Stripe, you should sign up for Stripe early, before you're ready to launch. And you're not allowed to process a payment with yourself, but you should do a
Yeah.
soft launch, accept some payments, wait for the payout to come, and then you can assume that there are multiple levels of risk analysis, but that first one has been done, so you're probably a little safer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Um, okay, so is there anything? What would Squarespace payments need to be for you to advise a client to use that? Or are you just someone that's just always going to advise use a third party for your payment stuff because it's just going to be more robust?
I think Squarespace Payments has a lot of potential.
Hmm.
First of all, I think there's a lot of potential to make Squarespace a lot of money, which I do think
Right.
is good for us.
Yeah.
Uh, I will say the one thing is Squarespace support. Um, I read through their help docs. I find them a little bit incomplete.
Yeah.
And when I write to their support, they're answering a lot of questions from a lot of people who have no idea what they're talking about, right? We
Yeah.
all have our little screenshots of
Totally get
support
that.
chats being like, "What
Ugh.
just happened?"
Yeah.
Um, it concerns me that they don't have domain expertise in payments. Stripe, you can do a phone call support, right? Squarespace, you
Oh,
can't. It's
that's nice.
email or live
Yeah.
chat, right? So if something's real, like if there's a big problem, it just concerns me that I don't really know how
Yeah.
that works. Another big one is like integrations. So
Yeah,
with
that would be really nice.
Yeah, so like Stripe, if you set up Stripe with Squarespace, you can use a third-party app to link it to QuickBooks, link it to any of the accounting software. You can also use Zapier,
Mm,
right? So,
yeah.
on checkout completed, on payment received, you can do Zaps. You can add them to your email list, or you can add it to your accounting software. It's very, very customizable. Squarespace has an API. It's very, it's like it's not an encouraged feature, right? And so
Right.
because of that, with Stripe has always been an API first company. That's why I generally tell people that you should probably stay away from Stripe's like not API products. Like you shouldn't send an invoice with Stripe; it's expensive, useless. But
Sure. Yeah.
but like they are built for these integrations, and you can
Right.
also set them up with like third-party chargeback early detection programs, right? So before a chargeback happens, you can sign up with Visa and MasterCard to get alerts. So 24 hours before, you can see the chargeback, and then you can decide whether to refund it, and then it doesn't ding your account. You don't get charged the fee. That
Right.
you can't set up. So Stripe is this whole apps ecosystem. So I think the first step for Squarespace is to fix, not fix the support, but help us with the support narrative, is what I'll say.
Yeah.
In that help us communicate that support is as strong as these awards say that it is. The second thing is open up the platform,
Okay.
or
Yeah,
just
I think
open.
that's
Like
a
I
big
understand
one.
it
I think
only.
that's a real big one too, is
Yeah,
like being able to be connect and use apps and do
yeah,
integrate with other things outside of Squarespace. I think that's a huge one.
yep.
Yeah.
The other
So,
thing is,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, the custom fraud rules. Those are probably that's really not something that's important for I think a lot of Squarespace's demo. But if you ask me
Right.
what an enterprise customer would want, that would be there. And then the international support. I believe payments is only in the U.S.
It's
right now.
only in US right now. I know they've have plans or have said they're going to be releasing it to, the next wave
Yeah,
of countries.
yeah.
But yeah.
That and then the current like foreign currency support
Mm,
would be nice. We've seen conversion rates. If somebody in I was just in South Korea. If somebody in South Korea is presented a US dollar checkout and they're presented a Korean won checkout at the same time, or an equal person, they'll check out faster and they're more likely to check out if it's presented in their local currency. So Stripe has
mm,
tools that can help you, do that and then obviously get it back to your home currency.
right.
That would be something cool for Squarespace to look into. But the first two are for clients. The
Hmm.
invoicing for helping web designers is a different thing, but for clients, that's what they should work on.
Okay, so that's there's for you what you're recommending is kind of go with Stripe right now. I can see a world where if someone just wants to quickly sell something on their website, they're going to throw up a Squarespace one and just see if it works, and then maybe switch over later. But right
Yeah.
now, you're kind of focused on Stripe until some of these other issues can get looked at a little bit more deeply. That's where you're at.
I think Stripe has more room to grow currently. I
Yeah.
think, like I said at the beginning, I don't think there's a wrong, like I don't think there's something that you
Right.
have to say to your clients. Don't use this. I've heard bad things. But if this is a client, they've got big aspirations. I would point them in the Stripe direction right now,
Sure.
as of
Sure.
August 2024.
That makes sense. Okay, well let's transition away from just kind of understanding the whole payments infrastructure of Squarespace and the entire internet at large, and move specifically to web designers and how web
Okay.
designers accept payments. Um, and when we were first talking, you mentioned some interesting ways that you set up your contracts with your clients as you were doing website projects with them. What are those things? What are the things you do to ensure you actually get paid? And
Yeah.
also, if you do get like a chargeback request or just a refund request from a client, it's like, hey, this isn't going to work, or you don't finish a project, or you have it in different installments,
Yeah.
that you have the money to do that, and you're not losing money.
Yeah, a lot of this is, it's sort of just trial by fire.
Yeah.
Um, I will say, you've alluded to a couple. I mean, I learned the tax form thing early. I started designing websites before I was 18. So I was
Mm,
so the banking system is really, the small business system is really not open to you if you're under 18, unless you
yeah.
can get your parents to put in their social, which my parents were not going to do. And so I was like accepting payments with what's called Venmo and PayPal and that kind of thing. And then, it was a whole thing. The first
Right.
thing I will say is the most important part about your business is payments, right?
Right.
Squarespace ran a great campaign that said a website makes it real. I would
Yeah.
argue a payment makes it real, right? It's like it is the lifeblood, and I don't like it. it's
Sure.
if as you're starting out, I think there's a transition between just get paid, just make it real, make the
Just,
dream real,
yeah.
and then optimize later, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
the couple like things I would just warn people about. I had this client who paid me. It was a $7,000 for two websites. I was super excited. I said 50% up
Yeah.
front. They paid. They paid with check. I did the whole. It was this is a corporate client, right? So it was a bill pay. I had to give my social, whatever. They disappeared.
They
I
disappeared.
disappeared, gone.
Just to yeah.
Like the business still exists. They don't respond to my emails, whatever. This money is.
But you got paid.
I got paid. So it's sitting on my balance sheet. I had to pay taxes on it at the end of the year because I'm cash basis accounting.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? Like, it's not really my money yet, right? Like, I don't really want
Right.
to spend it, but I already paid taxes on it. The contract said it was non-refundable. Like, so it's in this weird limbo. And it's after years, I'm just like, I just want to refund it, and I don't know how, right? I can mail
Right.
them a check, but it's business here in Baltimore, like but
Right.
it's just kind of bizarre, right? I know people whose clients have died. Um,
Oh,
yeah,
interesting. You're working with a client and then all of a sudden no
it's
more
it's
communication, they passed away. Interesting. Yeah,
yeah,
what do you
and
do in
so
that
because
scenario?
how do you refund? Like, what do
Right.
you do? Um, so that's if you're doing online payments, either ACH direct debit or credit card, refunds are a lot easier. And
Right.
that's something that you probably don't think about until you're in a weird situation where you're trying to find somebody's estate to refund them and it's like
Right.
you don't yeah, right so that because if it just goes
So,
back to the credit card it's somebody else's problem.
yeah.
um that's a thing
So
to consider.
what do you
Yeah.
do today? Like as you're doing a new project today, like what do you do? What do you write in that contract to make sure
Yeah.
to account for all of these things? Or a
So
proposal or whatever.
yeah, I mean, I think a great thing is you have one point of contact.
Mhm.
I would also, I what I say is our firm can terminate services at any time, and we list some of the
Mhm.
reasons we would terminate. Right? We're not getting responses. We're not working with one person. You can brainstorm the whole list, and then the last one is or any other reason, and then what we say is, we define our hourly rate, even if it's a project rate and we say, we're going to charge you this much. We'll send you an hourly statement, and then we'll refund the rest, and we'll move on. Um,
Oh,
that,
interesting. So
yeah.
your projects are more like retainer. It's like here's this much, and we'll just charge down that retainer a little bit,
So,
or I guess
so it
less a
depends.
retainer,
So
but
you can do that even if you're just charging a flat rate. But this
hmm.
is in the case of termination. And put in the caveat, I'm not a lawyer. I come from a lawyer
Yeah.
family,
Oh
but I'm
yeah.
not a
Big
lawyer.
disclaimer. We're not
Uh,
lawyers. Yeah, for
big
sure.
disclaimer.
Big
Um,
disclaimer.
in the event, right? You obviously hope you don't use these clauses, but if you use any of these clauses, it probably means that your client is disagreeing with you, which means that your
Right.
contract needs to really back you up.
Yeah.
And so one of the things when you say, we'll refund proportional to the work that we did,
Mm.
like I know the work I did, right? I know what's
Yeah.
fair. I'm acting in good faith, but my client is angry at me that I'm firing them, right? So whatever
Right.
I do, it's not fair, right? I'm
Right.
ripping them off. Right?
Correct.
So if you define an hourly rate in the contract, and then you keep, I have a Chrome extension that when I do work, it just gets, even if it's a
Keep track
project,
of all of
I
that.
just have
Yeah.
it, right? And the hourly rate in the contract is really inflated. It's a
Right.
high hourly rate, but it protects me for when they come back and if I was to fire a client, they come back and say, "Hey, you like this isn't fair. Why you should have refunded me 4,000 instead of only 2,000." I can
Right.
say, "Well, according to our contract, I did
If that
22
ever
and a half
happens.
hours of
Right.
work. It was billed at this rate. This is your refund. Goodbye." Right? It just makes things
Right.
smoother. So,
And obviously like the best solution to this is like keep a good relationship with your client and try to avoid these scenarios altogether, but
yeah,
they happen. These things do happen. I
they
mean,
do
I've
happen.
dealt with
And,
some rough clients.
there is a lot of talking to somebody who is always meeting with startup founders and that kind of thing. There is
Yeah.
so much money in this idea that people always underestimate the probability of a bad thing happening to them,
Right.
especially, and this is documented. Americans underestimate probability of bad things happening way more than any
Yeah.
other nation.
Yeah. We're a
Yeah, look,
very
it's an
litigious
optimistic,
society.
we're an
We're just very
optimistic.
sue happy.
Yeah, I mean, and
Hmm.
that's great, right? But you have to, I had my dad sign a contract when I worked with him, right? Because it's like, and even he wasn't even paying me.
you,
It was like, right?
you had
Because
your dad sign a contract.
well, because hey, we're like I'm gonna help you with this. I'm not gonna charge you any money, but like we need to define this relationship. I mean, I really think it's really important that you have a strong contract. I
Hmm.
also would just note that you can always be more flexible than your contract. You can always offer. In fact, I would say, people ask me for business advice. The only advice they offer is to be absurdly generous. Like
Yeah.
there is no downside. I every time I've ever just been like why like just given way more value than somebody paid for, somebody deserved, or I didn't like them, or
Hmm.
whatever. If you're just absurdly generous with people, it always comes back. It always does.
Yeah. No,
But
100%.
sometimes you need the piece of paper to back you up, right? And
Yeah.
so I would err on the side of protect yourself with the documents, protect with payments. We're going to talk about chargebacks and stuff. Protect yourself on that end, and then have the option to be flexible. But the problem is you can't be more, you can't draw the line in the sand after you've done stuff, right?
Right.
You can't say,
You got to
oh,
do these things up front.
yeah,
Right. You do have
no,
to set the boundaries up front.
yep,
And it is difficult. And like you said, like be overly generous. That's the best way to grow your business and just honestly enjoy your life, enjoy the work you
yeah,
do as well.
absolutely. I mean,
But
yeah,
it can be difficult, especially at the beginning. I think that's part of what makes it difficult is like how do you set these really high prices? How do you have those conversations when a client does come back and say, "Whoa, it looks like I'm kind of being taken advantage of if I sign this thing." Have you had those conversations with clients before? Or are they typically understanding of sort of the setup here?
so I think like pricing strategy is sort of a different conversation. On the other side, for like these are the things that protect me, especially if you're dealing with another small business owner. I think the answer is we are in good faith. I want to have a good faith relationship. I'm really excited to work for you, but this is my livelihood, and I have to protect my downside just like you.
Right.
And I think most understanding people are totally fine with that. If they're not fine with that, and I realize this is, people talk about, be really selective with your clients. That's a really great thing to do when you have a healthy business, right? When the money's
Sure.
coming in, right? But when the money is
Sure.
coming in, sometimes you don't have that
It's
option.
no, you kind of
Um,
got to take what comes up. No.
it's an indication, right? If your client doesn't want to sign a thing that says that you can terminate the project halfway through, and so you have to decide in the context of your business what is right for you, and that like we can't give you that advice.
No,
We can
no,
help you
that's
think through.
totally up to you in your
Um,
life scenario
yeah, but I
situation
will
for sure.
say if you're just starting out and you're doing stuff really, very cheaply or blah 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 blah, the reason you're doing it cheaply is for your portfolio and your experience, but it's way more about your testimonial and trying to get references from them. And
Right.
so generally, people who are really, challenging to work with, their references will probably also be challenging to work with. And so it's something to consider. I'm not going to
Right.
say don't take the
No, that's
money
a
because I've
yeah.
built websites for $50. Like
Yeah.
it's a journey.
It's been done.
Um, but
I know what you
but
mean.
think about it.
Well, so where does in all this payment stuff, where does Fortitude fit into all this?
Yeah.
And give us like a quick pitch on Fortitude and like how does it plug into this ecosystem of payments and stuff?
Sure. So Fortitude is a platform for professional services firms to protect you from chargebacks and fraud, to pay less in payment processing fees, and to integrate with whatever software you're using.
Uh-huh.
So we're a way for you to accept payments from your clients, your deposits, your invoices, payment links, and subscriptions. Right
Yeah.
now, as of August 2024, but we got a really exciting roadmap. Basically, anything payments, if you're getting paid, we want to be involved. Um, with the chargeback thing, I think they're more. We can put the website in the description of more resources,
Yeah.
but basically, the chargeback is a big problem, especially with professional service firms, because clients can When I say professional services, I'm talking about web designers. That's 90% of our business right now.
Right.
But also anybody who's selling words or digital, something that isn't easily defined, right? Because when you get a chargeback and the bank investigates, they want to see a FedEx shipping receipt that says, oh, the thing was delivered. Great. This person's lying when they say it wasn't delivered. Merchant gets the money back. With a website, you're going to want to send them a contract. You're going to want to send them Zoom calls. You're going to send them the published website. But I've seen these chargeback investigations where you can send, the client says you didn't deliver the website and you respond with the published website and you lose the chargeback because
Yeah.
we're talking about a 2-minute review by an overseas Chase employee.
Yeah.
And so what we do is for the two types of chargeback fraud, one is like classic card fraud. Somebody stole my credit card and paid you. But also, hey, will you run a business with your wife? Your wife took your credit card to pay me. Technically for you, that's credit card fraud, right? If you say you didn't authorize use that card, right? So
Total fraud.
you can actually
Yeah.
file a chargeback against me, and it's my responsibility as the website designer, as the merchant, to verify your identity.
So
Which is
even like under normal circumstances, this stuff happens. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so the first thing we do is we work with the credit card companies to verify the payer's identity. So we do what's called 3D Secure, right, where there's a little pop-up that comes up and you get a text code.
Sure.
And then if that verification is successful, then the fraud liability shifts from you to the credit card company. So
Sure.
it's not a problem at all, not something you worry about. The other thing, which is much more dangerous for web designers, and is where we see most of the disputes, is like the big one is goods aren't as described. Hey, this website isn't what you told me it was going to look like. You can file
Yeah.
disputes in some cases up to 450 days after payment. So that's a year and a half, which is kind of
Holy
crazy.
cow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
think
that's
about the work you
wild.
did a year and a half ago. Um, and then the bank is supposed to like investigate. What we do for that is when somebody pays, we have this thing called Express Confirm. They click 3 or 4 boxes depending on the case, and they type their name and they click it. The boxes say, I received the goods, I'm happy with the goods, I understand, blah, 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 the terms. The words in those boxes were not picked
All right.
randomly. They
So
actually map perfectly to every chargeback. It's called a reason code, right? So the bank
mhm.
says this is chargeback reason 729. They map perfectly. So when the bank comes to you and says, hey, this is a Visa type chargeback 3, this is what the client says, you say, here's the thing that they signed, and we highlight.
Right, exactly. They've
Yeah,
said they're happy with all this. So
exactly.
y'all Fortitude allows you to send invoices for your web design project, and
Exactly.
when a customer's paying the
Yep.
invoice, they check these things that almost ensures that you're not going to get a chargeback request.
So
Like,
it
wait,
doesn't, yeah. So it doesn't necessarily ensure that you're not going to get a chargeback.
but it
It
okay.
it helps. So the first thing, there's this thing called friendly fraud, which is actually most of disputes. Estimates go as high as 75%, which is, when you file a chargeback, you get a statement credit right away,
Hmm.
right to your bank, and you don't have to pay interest.
Yeah.
So times are tough, right? Interest rates are going up. People have less money. It's a pretty common thing where people take their credit card statement, sort it from high to low, and dispute the top one.
Yeah.
And that gives
Yeah.
them some breathing room where they don't have to pay interest on their credit cards. Even people I've onboarded to Fortitude admit doing this. It's
Sure.
look, if you're going to do that to Apple, I don't care. Like,
Right.
you're gonna 90 days later or whatever, they're gonna come back and you get your money back. I'm not telling anybody to do that, but as a consultant who works with small businesses, a big company has the cash flow and whatever to handle that. On the
Yeah.
other end, you're getting that statement credit. Let me let you in a secret. Chase Bank, Jamie Dimon, he's Greek by the way. Jamie Dimon doesn't
Here
lose
we go.
money ever. That doesn't
Yeah.
happen, right?
Yeah.
So when
Sure.
they get that statement credit, they took it from the merchant. And if there isn't
Hmm.
money in your Stripe account, they take it right from your bank account. So on the flippity flip, the merchant's bank account's now overdrafted, right? You're a web designer for a website you built a year ago. So in protecting you from a chargeback actually happening, what we do is, usually web designer stuff is up at the top of the statement, right?
Yeah.
But we've clicked these express confirms. It's not, the time to pay a Fortitude invoice goes from about 5 seconds with a regular invoice to about 15 seconds with Fortitude. So we're not talking about, this is a hard thing to do,
Sure.
but the platform is designed to feel substantial. We did a lot of testing to make it feel very trustworthy, but also to make it feel, make people realize that this is like you were making a big payment. Because of that, we have seen that the actual chargeback rate is much lower. We're still getting chargeback. We haven't lost any yet, but we're still getting them.
Oh, there we
But the
go. Yeah.
rate is much lower than industry standard. And right, so when we get that, the percentage is lower. When we get them, we haven't lost yet, and I don't intend to. I can't guarantee that we won't lose because we got a lot of third parties here, but we've put it together. That document that we talked about that they sign, when they clicked the link in their email from you, it verified their identity on this side. And so that's actually the lowest barrier for the federal government under the e-Sign Act for their identity to be verified. And then we set a timer and we have to re-verify them after. So we do all these things in the background. We check their IP address and their location. We have an AI-powered risk engine that's looking at a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
We do all this background monitoring. And then on the front end, customer never notices, but we can flag payments where we don't actually charge the card. We just pre-authorize the card and we tell you, hey, here's the payment. Here's why we flagged it. Here's the plain text, simple English summary of why this is a risk. Do you want to take this payment or not? And when we pre-authorize the card, you don't charge any Stripe fees. So if you say, never mind, we're gonna have them pay again or pay another way, there's no Stripe fees. Everything goes. But if you were to refund afterwards, you don't get those fees back, which is crazy.
Yeah,
what happens?
That's just part of the working in internet world.
Well, it's actually a new thing. Yeah, the fees not getting back because the interchange rate, one of the fees that pays for the points, the company does get back.
Okay. Yeah. So someone gets their money back, but it's definitely not the little guy. That's interesting.
Surprise, surprise.
The little person.
Surprise. Yeah.
Well, John, thank you for jumping on and just going over all this. This was fascinating, honestly, to just hear about how this whole world works. And I'm really excited about Fortitude. It sounds like an excellent product, especially for web designers. Yeah,
thank you very much, Will. Also, if you're a web designer, check out Fortitude. We've got $25,000 in free processing credit, which is worth a lot of money right now.
There we go. That's pretty good.
$800.
Yeah, a few hundred. That's like $700-800. Yeah, that'd be.
Yeah.
Who couldn't use that?
Yeah, integrates with every software you can think of. Really flexible. And then also, we didn't even talk about ACH direct debit that much, but we can point your clients.
Right, that's a whole nother world. Yeah,
it's a whole other world. And then again, the fees are capped, right? So you're not paying 3% of 1,000
some
or 10,000.
exorbitant fees, for any ACH, which is really nice.
Yeah,
you get to keep a lot more of the money you worked for.
Yeah,
right. John, thank you so much for jumping on, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Will.
All right.